Everyone, welcome back to another episode on the Cerebral Cricketer podcast. Today we're very, very special guests on the show. We have Shannon Young, who's a Melbourne-based cricket coach, founder of YoungGun Cricket and CEO of Cricket Performance Lab. He is a former Richmond Cricket Club head coach in Victorian Premier Cricket, has been involved in Cricket Victoria's high performance pathway programs, including the under-17 male emerging program. Through his coaching work, Shannon focuses on player development, game education, and cricket technology, and helping cricketers progress from club cricket level towards higher levels of the game. So, Shannon, before we get into cricket and coaching and the development side, can you give the people a sense of your journey in cricket from coaching at club cricket level to YoungGun Cricket and Cricket Performance Lab?
Yeah, I can. It's probably been a 20-year journey. Was a player who, I think all my old coaches would agree, it sort of pissed his talent away, and didn't do what he should have done with his talent. Did have a car accident that, some people would say cost me a career, but I didn't have a career to start with. So the lure to coaching was sort of after playing, did some local clubs, captain coach, which tends to happen in Melbourne. That was sort of the first foray in, and then I went back to Canberra Magpies where I'd played. I played at Collingwood and was a development coach and then an assistant coach, chairman of selectors, and then bought a business in Geelong, so coached in Geelong for a year and then went back to Canberra Magpies as head coach. Did 2 years there and then went over to Richmond where I spent almost a quarter of my life, so spent 14 years.
Yeah, that's amazing and incredible journey as well, like we were just talking before the podcast. And you've worked with many cricketers and developing them. Can you give us some names that you worked with?
I've been really, really fortunate. The early days, I guess, in the Richmond days as a Premier head coach, Cameron White was at Richmond, Danny Christian, Will Sheridan, Alan Wise, and then part of my journey there was I brought through a whole heap of really young, exciting talent. Guys like Fraser-McGurk, Mitch Perry, Scott Edwards, Austin Anlazark, who's contracted at the moment, Riley Mark, who's up in Sydney, who was Victorian contracted, and then was also really fortunate enough that along the journey of club stuff, started YoungGun Cricket, which is my own coaching business, and so through that got to deal with lots of super talented players and on their journey, Ella Haywood, Molly Strano, like probably too many to mention. But then we went and started the Cricket Performance Lab, and that was world first technology. That been really, really fortunate with that. So Babar Azam's probably high on the list. Sisa Darson, Glenn Maxwell, Marcus Stoinis, Aaron Hardy was in recently. Marnus Labuschagne spends a lot of time in the lab. Really, really fortunate that with players at that elite level, I think they trust me. I'm a bit of a straight shooter, so they know where they stand with me. But my passion was probably with those young Richmond guys for 14 years.
No, it's an incredible journey, and there's a lot to really get into because I really want to pick your brains around. You mentioned a lot of high elite cricketers playing at the highest level come to you for advice and all that kind of stuff and learning. So it'd be good to kind of pick your brains in terms of what specifically they ask you. But I also wanted to touch on, you mentioned with the Richmond boys. The reason why I guess we ended up we're doing this podcast now is because of Jason Gillespie's comment on Instagram. So I'll actually read out the comment to give people a bit of context. I just posted up a clip, didn't think too much of it. It was the clip was around Adam Crosswaite's interview, who talks about Glenn Maxwell and how Richmond Cricket Club didn't back him for the first, so he played seconds and then eventually left, something along those lines. So then that clip, I didn't think too much of a time, but then Jason Gillespie, the great fast bowler for Australia, decides to comment on the clip. So that already made me happy in of itself, But then, I saw your comment. It was very thoughtful. So I really appreciate your time kind of sharing that comment. And I'll actually read out Jason Gillespie's comment, and then maybe you can kind of share your thoughts around what he said. So Jason said, frustrates no end the attitudes of some clubs. Young, talented players that come through and they worry about upsetting the players at the club, like the yo-yo A grader and Harden B grader. For F's sake, club cricket needs to understand that they're there to progress talent. Your club will win trophies and all that shit. But for F's sake, for a Richmond Cricket Club to be so stupid and not embrace a talent like Glenn is just unacceptable. Clubs need to change their attitude. Seen it too many times. So obviously, a lot of passion there in what he's saying. And I mean, you also mentioned in the comment, like, it's not like, he has a lot of experience coaching, he's coaching PSL and stuff like that. So he speaks to some sort of truth there, but I know that you had your own discussion. So I wanted to hear your thoughts about that comment.
Yeah, I think fundamentally, as I said in the comment, I actually agree with what Jason's saying in terms of what does a Premier Club exist to do, and it is, I'm in absolutely the same boat as him, that as Premier Clubs we exist to produce talent that's capable of playing at the next level, which is state level, and then hopefully go again to Australian and international level. You probably picked up in the comment, and it was probably synonymous with my time at Richmond, is I'm fiercely defensive of my players and the club, and what an amazing job of development we did while I was there. So Crossy, who's a mate of mine, was speaking about Glenn Maxwell departing Richmond, which I think was probably about 16 or 17 years ago. So it had happened before I got to Richmond. I just thought an historical, again, agree with Jason, understand where he's coming from, but I think to make a statement that now, the social media demographics would tell you that not many people would understand that happened 15 years ago, and to mention Richmond in the suggestion that we hadn't developed talent, I just thought that as much as I respect him and everything he's done, how could you not? I'm also fiercely defensive of, as I should be, and I'm really proud of what we did development-wise. So I just wanted to sort of clear the air with that and just say that an historical event and a one-off shouldn't detract from what is and what was Australia's best development Premier Club. We produce more first-class players than any other Premier Club.
And so would you acknowledge that there was an issue in that sense that Jason was talking about, like even before you came into the scene for Richmond Cricket Club, but then from what you've just said, that you've done things along the way to help with the structure and the way that cricketers are nurtured and talent is produced. So if that's the case, what exactly did you do and what works did you do to help with the nurturing of talent?
Yeah, I mean, Jason's point, he talks about, yo-yo sort of first and second graders and hardened sort of guys that, the cricket clubs were built on back in the 90s and the 2000s. But the reality of Premier Cricket, particularly in Melbourne now, is it's a young person's game. Obviously, there's a lot of finance and money and sponsorship in local clubs, and so what's tended to happen, certainly in my time, is if you reach 24, 25, you would start to look at a level below sub-district cricket or local cricket and be paid. The level of commitment, is extreme at Premier Cricket. So a lot of these players who were the yo-yo first or second graders or hardened players would look for opportunities elsewhere. Now, if you lose a 25-year-old player at Premier Cricket, the reality is now that you're probably replacing that 25-year-old with a 15 or a 16-year-old that's come through your Dowling. So how did that affect what I did at Richmond? Well, I just jumped earlier. I could see the writing on the wall. When I first got to Richmond, as I said, I had some amazing senior people around that club: Cameron White, Dan Christian, Sam Taylor, Matt Mulcahy, Alan Wise. So it had a really core senior group. But what I looked at was their age demographic told me that in 2 to 3 years they weren't going to be there. So I created the first sort of academy-style program of its kind out at Richmond. So that was my first or second year. And we just made talent ID and development an absolute priority. And I'm not sure too many other Premier clubs were doing it, to be honest.
And in that academy, what sort of aspects of cricket did you instill or teach to these young cricketers?
Yeah, so probably the most important thing that we focused on wasn't cricket. It was actually, these guys are really talented. You have to have talent. Talent gets you to the dance. So it was more a case of their character, also sort of forecasting. I looked at, I had a pretty unique ability to look at a very young player at 12 or 13 years of age and almost sort of envision forward and see parts of their game that we thought we could expand and that would stand up to Premier first 11 and maybe even higher. But quality-wise, the first thing we did was we had to instill belief in them, belief in themselves. I worked really strongly on trust. And then it's very topical at the moment that a lot of people talk about hard coaching. You see examples on social media of people sort of saying, oh, hard coaching. Well, yeah, I coached them hard, but I loved them really hard. And so what we then did was we picked the right talent. We got that talent to believe in itself. We created everything that was about development. So our club was never about first grade, second grade, third grade nets. If you're a 14-year-old academy kid, you batted against the first 11 players, the second 11 players, fourth 11 players, had the same expectations, the same standards, and my standards are extremely high. So that was a big part of how I got these really young, talented young men to know that I believed in them and to believe in themselves, because I had the same expectations of a Cam White or a Dan Christian on these 13 and 14-year-old kids.
Yeah, that's incredible. I think obviously instilling confidence and belief is easier said than done. And you said that you coached them hard. So can you give us an example of that? And maybe if someone that we know, like you said, Cameron White, etc., that maybe you did push them because you saw a lot of potential in them.
Yeah. There's no specific example because, as I said, it was everyone. So it was never a case of your talent or where we sort of saw your future meant that we coached you any differently. It was our only goal out at the club for that period of time was win the club championship, which is obviously points allocated for all 11s across all those 11s. That was our only goal as a club, to win the club championship. So what that did is it meant player 1 to 46 could all contribute to the overall goal. You might be a kid, playing your first game in the force, you could take a catch that wins us a game, or you could save a boundary that wins us a game that contributes to that club championship. So in terms of coaching them hard, it was just my standards. And even though I didn't play first-class cricket myself, I understand how difficult a task that is. Did something recently where the Richmond guys would probably smirk a little, but I used to talk to them about they needed to be in the 1%. So of a pool of 300 to 400 Premier cricketers at round 1, if they wanted to play for Victoria, they needed to be in the 1% of that. And so everything we did, I was really strong on fielding. Fielding was kind of my thing. That fielding for me is all about effort and attitude, so everyone could do it. But the standard we had of our first 11 players was the exact same that we had, and that's why sort of Fraser-McGurk and all those guys, there's a young guy, Jack Sosnick now, Mitch Perry, they were all elite fieldsmen because we did it and we did it and we did it. And if I was ever hard, it was always, I sprayed them. There's no problem with that. I think most people from the outside thought it was this sort of boot camp style coaching, but it wasn't. It was just, these are our standards and this is what it's going to take for you to play at the next level in terms of what you expect of yourself and what I expect of you. So any of the criticism or any of the blow-ups was always about our standards. It was never about performance, or it was never about skill errors, or even when we lost games, which we did because we were rebuilding, it wasn't so much about that. It was always about the effort and the standards.
No, that makes total sense. And In saying that though, like I know that you said that you want them to, be in the 1% and work hard, etc. And from the outside, people might see it as a boot camp. Would you say that might also create pressure for the players to be at a certain standard? And if so, like what did you do to help them navigate that pressure?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of pressure, but there's a lot of pressure in life. So this young generation were coming through, and if they wanted to get into the uni course they wanted to get into, they needed a high ATAR. So that's competitive. If they wanted to get a rental property, they were competing against, families and stuff. So that was competitive. Everything that we started to do was about competing. And we created, we basically looked at handing the club over to the players. And to do that, I had to believe in them and they had to know I believed in them. So yes, while there was pressure, it was also that we helped them navigating by saying that I particularly was in no doubt that they were capable, and by handing over the club to them and saying it was their club and they were responsible for their own culture and their own standards, that reinforced the belief I had in them and the trust that I had in them. There's not many people that would, basically hand over a Premier Cricket club to a bunch of, under 18s. And it was a pretty crazy time that I think most people would understand that, we were debuting Fraser-McGurk at 15, Zach Sleeman at 16, Will Parker at 16. And it had never really been done. And it goes back to Jason's comment that traditionally it was, no, you picked your hardened guy and you made your young guys earn it. And I was of the belief, like we did at training and all our standards and all our expectations, that the best place to learn was at first 11 level. And, some people look at it, you're throwing them in at the deep end. Well, I'm also saying, hey, I think you're up to this. Yep. And for me, once you believe in a group of players and they know that you believe in them, then, pretty incredible things are potentially going to happen.
And something I noticed as well, like echoing your sentiments about younger players playing in higher levels, or even a kind of a higher level or bigger age group than they currently are. Like I've interviewed many players with, I think the recurring theme is that they talk about like, at 9 years of age, I was playing against 15-year-olds, right? And it's the same thing here. Like if you just kind of expect someone to always play in their own level or their age group level, like you're not going to accelerate their growth. And I think that's the point, right? Like if you really see a lot of talent in someone, then obviously you need to be pushing them in that right direction. Because if they're stuck with this kind of same age group and all that, you're actually stunting their growth, because it's like they're already as good as they are. Then it's like, okay, what can we do next? And then keep growing them as players. So like in saying that, and I understand maybe people will be like, you can't just throw people into the deep and that kind of stuff. But then obviously you yourself, you see something in that player to be like, yes, he is good enough despite his age or whatever. And my question would be like, what do you see in that player to determine or demarcate like, this guy can actually play first grade level, for example, and then I'm just going to put them there. Like, do you have any key indicators or metrics, or is it just kind of a gut feel? What's your assessment around that?
Yeah, there's no key metrics. A lot of it was gut feel. You talk about my journey as a coach. So obviously I had a coaching business in YoungGun. I was doing one-on-ones, probably 30 to 35 one-on-ones a week, maybe 1,000 balls a day. So I was seeing a lot of technique, and I was seeing a lot of decision-making and how players would move. And then, as I mentioned before, I had the benefit of, watching White and Christian and how they went about it, and Alan Wise. So, there was no key metric. And was it a little bit gut feel? Yeah, it was. But we also started the academy, as I said. That was a really low grade of cricket. So these guys, even though they were young, in some cases 12 and 13 years of age, they played in a competition that, although it was against men, they were probably better than the men they were playing against, but it wasn't about fifers and hundreds. We actually taught them the Richmond way. So we got to meet the parents. We got to see what made these kids tick, which is the kid who seeks feedback, which is the kid that is a little bit quiet. And we started to embrace their individuality. So then, once I knew the character and once I knew the person behind the player, then I could start to identify some skills that, Greg Chappell and a lot of people through the CA pathways had talked about stretching talent. And so for me, there's no problem with stretching talent, but you've got to understand whether that person behind the player is capable of, with some guys we could throw them up. We could just throw them in the deep end. Other guys we had to, put floaties on them or help them swim. We had this really holistic understanding of development and what it looked like. And I was also quite vocal that, lots of clubs, every club in the world will tell you, it's about development, and then do things that's not consistent with development. Back to Jason's comment, I had to make some really hard, tough decisions on some guys who were really great club people, but had been that yo-yo second to first grader. And I started to, I guess, look at young talent and say, okay, well, where's this player at? So this, player in question hypothetically was a 24, 25-year-old player, great clubman, had given really great service, but had played, maybe 60 or 80 games for an average of under 20 or low 20s as a batter. So I just looked at it and said, well, hang on, if I put a Fraser-McGurk in, or a De Rosario, or a Shobit Singh, or a Ped Necker, where are they going to be after 60 or 80 games? And more often than not, I would back them in that they would average more than the senior player. But I lost a lot of good people in making decisions, but the other thing we did at Richmond was I was always honest with them. And I always told those guys that, look, if we're going to be the club we want to be, I had a 5-year plan, and I was really honest with them and said that it was about young talent. So it was also picking the right talent. Like lots of people will tell you, there's the statements on Instagram that every post you see that talent will be outworked by hard work, and you need hard work. Well, yeah, you do, but it's a coaching cliche. If you don't have talent, you don't even get to the dance. And I found during that process that a lot of people in cricket are scared of talent. Extreme talent is something that most people think is really hard to manage. Most of your keyboard warriors out there get frustrated by really talented players and the decisions they make. So it was a marrying up of the belief that I spoke about. It was the talent. It was decision making. It was, I believe, we're all products of our environment. So I had to get to know the parents. I had to get to know their siblings. So it was a holistic approach, but fundamentally it was I made the decision that I would back talent in, and what that talent meant was, most people would argue that, you never played at first class level, so how do you know? But over the journey, there was plenty of people that hadn't played much Premier Cricket and were making assumptions on, players' games and was it up to this or up to that. I'd sort of come to the conclusion that if they had the talent, we could match it and teach them the attitude. The game ultimately is a decision-making game. Yeah, we make a series of decisions. So we also focus a lot of our development on that. And then, what we managed to produce is there were years where there was one year, I'm not great with years. We had 10 players in the state under 19, so metro country, 14 players, so 28 players in a squad. Richmond Cricket Club had 10. Graham Rummins, who played a lot of cricket for Victoria, was involved in the program. He used to joke when he saw me that the state program was Richmond's pre-season, because the guys wear their club clothes and there were so many Richmond guys. But that was just, we picked the most talented guys we could. We understood what we thought their roles were as well. We were really clear on what we wanted them to achieve. And then our standards were really high of, they weren't unreasonable, but it also instilled the belief that if my standards were so high of what I expected of them, well, I must have believed they were capable.
I mean, everything you said, I'm so excited because this is why I started the podcast, to have these kind of conversations. Like, you talked a lot about that kind of nature versus nurture, knowing the person behind the player, knowing the parents and their upbringing. Like, I think that's essentially cricket, in the sense that it's really important to understand that and really understand the psychological side to a player in order to get that understanding of how good they can be or where that talent goes. Because you said, it's funny, you started that, like, your explanation with it is a gut feel, but then you explained pretty logically, everything that goes into our decision making. So I'd say, like, from your experience, like talking to or working with such great players that played the game or played first class level, you've obviously seen things, and obviously everyone's different, right? Like you mentioned, some you got to hold their hand, some you can kind of throw them in the deep end, but you've already worked with a lot of players where you can kind of see what needs to be done and you do it accordingly, right? So I think a lot of people, and this is my experience, and also why I'm passionate about like this podcast, is because I've seen a lot of people that get coached who have talent but get coached like almost like a same template for everyone, right? And everyone's so different that you need to, it's like a tool, you just got to wield it to the right tool and get the best out of them. So like some people do really well with being challenged. Some people do really well when it comes to being words of affirmation, right? So like psychologically, like all of these aspects of a player is what we should understand as yourself as a coach. And then we kind of work with the player. And because the talent you said, I 100% agree. I think when you see talent in someone, it could be as a batsman, as me being a batsman, well, that's all I understand. So like, when you see it, the way they play a certain shot, you're just like, wow, that's in them. And now I guess you as a coach would be like, how can I bring the best out of them consistently with that bit of talent or glimpse that you've seen? So sometimes it doesn't always work out. And I feel like sometimes a lot of the reason why it doesn't work out for a lot of these quote unquote talented players is because they weren't coached properly. They weren't given the tools in order to get the best out of them consistently. And sometimes when you mention like, throwing a youngster in the deep end that has talent, right? Like you're obviously there to guide them, but in other situations where they don't have a certain coach, like they'll crumble, and then someone is judging them, being like, look, you can't throw people in the deep end. Look, young talent, what could he do? He couldn't live up to the hype or whatever. But it's like not true, because he wasn't given the tools and that grounding to flourish, right? So I think that's why I really respect everything you said, because I think that is the core of essentially getting the best out of players and going to that high level, right?
Yeah, very much so. The other thing we did, and I probably should mention it, is I talked to the whole group, and when I say the whole group, the other thing that I did, and I probably should mention, is yes, I was a Premier head coach, but I managed the academy. I was at every academy session. The Dowling came back. I was at every Dowling session. So I had 60 players on a senior list. We had 45 in the academy. Then as Dowling came about, I knew every one of those players. Every one of them had my phone number, could reach out to me whenever, and it was consistent with being the one club approach. And no disrespect to any of the guys out there, Premier Cricket coaching, being a head coach of a Premier club is probably, in some ways it's an easy job, because all the players you get want to play at the next level, so that they all come to training and you don't have to balance, the older guy who's time away from his family and all that sort of stuff. But the thing with Premier head coaching is you work for next to nothing financially. You're under-resourced. Sometimes conditions aren't as favourable. You got council doing practice wickets and all that sort of stuff. So I get it that most Premier head coaches would focus on, the what I used to call the tip of the iceberg, but I had a pyramid theory. I was always fascinated by how the pyramids were built, and the pyramids are obviously built from the base up. And the Egyptians back in the day used ramps to actually push massive pieces of stone up. And I always looked at that and thought that's how you develop things. So of all those guys that we spoke about, and many that didn't go on to play Premier First 11 or play state cricket, most of them started our fourth 11. Now, the interesting thing with that is when you talk to people, most people have a really poor, dim view of fourth 11 Premier cricket, thirds and fourths. A lot of people out in local land and the subbies clubs, would say to their young talent, "Oh no, we'll stay here because you'll play against men," like you made the example before. But what we also looked at is just their training standards and everything that went. It wasn't just about on field. The other thing we did is we managed to convince the whole club, and mostly these really talented kids, is I talked about the my cricket era. When I played, and I very rarely talk about when I played because, as I said before, I pissed all my talent away. But when I played, if you were the best player, you would only know that by people saying that. Now these kids know everything about every other kid they're playing against through my cricket. My cricket's great, don't get me wrong, but when we took the focus off the performance and actually made it about the process and the standards, then we also saw that, as you were saying, that we could manage to elevate, and we really got to know the people behind the players. But the other thing that was instrumental with that was they had to get to know each other. Yeah, so the better they got to know each other, the better they understood that the culture was theirs. And if a kid was walking into our club at 15 years of age, well, he had as much a responsibility for the standards and the expectations as the captain of the first 11 did. So it was this kind of perfect storm. But we just did things differently. No other Premier club was doing it. Most of them, and rightly or wrongly, they believed in natural evolution. So the natural evolution of Premier cricket, which was district cricket that I played many years ago, was you didn't really give much attention to your third and your fourth 11. You just waited for the kids who were the best players to sort of get themselves into the seconds, and then you'd put sort of the resources into them and the attention into them. But as I said, if we were going to be a true development club, I actually went the other way and said, well, let's put the resources into the academy level before they were even playing Premier cricket. Let's teach them the Richmond way. And so when they came into the club, they already knew the culture. They already knew the standards. Yeah.
You talked a lot about, building that foundation. So how would you describe the traditional, quote unquote, traditional way of playing cricket versus, I guess, cricket now? Like, we actually talked about this before the podcast a little bit about Babar, where, we sort of agreed, I guess, where there should be that foundation of playing test cricket that we all know, which is like being patient and waiting for the right ball, etc. But then we kind of have to adapt to the aggression of T20 cricket and somehow wield that into that kind of traditional way of playing cricket. And as opposed to baseball, it's just kind of aggression in all situations, which might not be the most wise or the best way to play. So, like, in a general sense, though, like, because you would have obviously interacted with many other coaches and been across many other coaching philosophies as well. So how would you describe, like, the quote unquote old school traditional cricket way versus what you might preach now, or what you feel like coaching is heading towards? Yeah,
it's a really good question you pose. So traditional methods, I guess, if I've only got my Premier coach hat on, was really steely resolve and like work people into the ground, and you had to, day in the dirt. And it was about 90 overs, and that was all well and good. That was great. But then the advent of, particularly white ball cricket, what we tended to focus on is we created tempos. Now every club, every organisation, cricket organisation will talk about tempo, and we'll talk about gears. They're all different things. I created a traffic light system, red, yellow, green, that was not only about tempos in the game. So red was, in terms of that traffic light, look, you have to be a little bit more defensive. Yellow was like you can expand out a little bit more, understand your risk versus reward, but use some caution. And then green was sort of play with a bit more freedom. But we also talked about those tempos in your life. Everything we did was about understanding, how the game has a natural rhythm, but so does life. So when do you have an opportunity in life that is a green light that you want to grab with both hands and you want to attack? versus when is there a life decision or something going on in your life that maybe just requires you to trust in your defence a little bit more. So I think just my experience of traditional cricket, it was more that sort of red focused, and if you played, if you could trust in your defence and then you expanded out, it was sort of a badge of honour, and you were tough and you were mentally tough. And, these young guys who were loose, and Harry Brook and all this, I think he's a wonderful player, Harry Brook. It's probably no coincidence that, I've spent a lot of time with Jake Fraser-McGurk. He's like a son to me. And the criticism of Jake is, he's reckless, and it takes balls to go out and play that way. Yeah, these guys are professional cricketers. It's their job. Now, Jake could go out and leave balls in a T20 and give himself 6 to 8 balls, which people want to do. But, the interesting thing with that is I think it comes back to knowing your player. So, Suyavanshi's lighting up the world at the moment, and it's so good to watch. But I can't imagine too many people are grabbing hold of Suyavanshi in the IPL and saying, oh, you might have to rein it back a little bit here. You're never going to be able to do that. You know where that criticism is coming from? That's coming from ex-players. And now just cricket, sort of people that watch cricket in general. He's missed out 3 times in the T20 series in England. You can already start to see the knives are out. Oh, we knew he wouldn't hold up. It wouldn't work. Indian pitches are flat. Same thing happened with Jake. So, you also have to know the individual. So I spent so much time with Jake that I knew what was in his best interests and what his, I guess, characteristics and his talent. Well, why would you want to harness that? The interesting thing, and I'm really, quite defensive of Jake, is people used to talk about, so his Premier record was he only averaged 25 at Premier level, which for most people they would say, well, you can't play for Victoria if you only average 25 at Premier level. But what they didn't understand is since his kid was 16, he was a match winner. So, in a Premier cricket season, which is, 15, 16 games, from the second that Jake Fraser-McGurk came into our first 11 at 16, he did things that no one else could do. He was a match winner. So if he could win me 3 or 4 matches as a club coach for that year, I don't care what his average was. Yeah, but I saw him get 20s and just absolutely tear opposition apart. Opposition would become spectators because there was this kid and we knew how talented he was, and it was like, oh, wow, now we see it. Harry Brook's the same, Bazball's the same, but life's about balance. So you've got to know when a situation requires, the risk versus reward analysis. Okay, so yes, if I play with high risk, is the reward high reward? And I think at times, you mentioned Bazball, I think at times, the risk has been in line with the reward, particularly on flat pitches in Pakistan, and I know they got New Zealand in one of the early series. But I think what most of the commentators are saying, what my gut feel is on the game now, is everyone wants to blame white ball cricket. Everyone wants to say, oh, well, it's because of T20 cricket. Well, no, it's not. It's debatable. I mean, I love T20 cricket. I spend a lot of time at the IPL and a Big Bash, and a lot of the players I work with are T20 players. But for me, it's entertainment. I can absolutely appreciate the skills, and I've worked with a lot of players. They're super skillful. And yes, it's cricket, but it's cricket's entertainment version. Whereas if you said to me, oh, you can only choose one game, I'm going to 5 days of Test cricket. My daughter, who's 22, who stopped playing cricket when she's 8 or 9, hasn't missed a live ball at the MCG for 17 years. Yeah? So, that's cricket to me. But the other thing was also, I didn't harness. The worst thing you do to a kid like Fraser-McGurk is harness him, right? Or have him think you don't believe in him. And results aren't about that. That's about saying you're a really special talent, and if we put you in the right place, you can win us games. And I think that's where Bazball started. Might have departed a little bit from from that. But it's not a red ball versus a white ball argument or an old school argument. You know, I've been lucky enough to go all around the world. We've spoken about it before, that in Pakistan and India and most of Southeast Asia and the subcontinent, there's a real technical focus. And it's hard to argue with that. When you watch a Shubman Gill or, some of these guys, technically, KL Rahul, I was lucky enough to be at an IPL with Delhi, and I got to watch him train and play. I mean, how could you not like watching that? So I think in Australia we moved away more from the technique more to and we probably got it wrong a little bit as coaches, that we just wanted the outcome. Don't care how you do it, just hit the ball over there. And then I think we made an adjustment to bring that back, that there's some foundations of how you play the game. Now, if those foundations are strong, how you then expand out of your foundations is totally up to your individual style of play. But the one other interesting thing with that is, as soon as you coach Jake Fraser-McGurk, or Tim Seifert, or a lot of the other guys I've worked with through the CPL, Stoinis, Maxwell, all those guys we mentioned, when I travelled to Pakistan, I automatically became a power hitting coach, Australian power hitting coach. Now, Jake could laugh at this, and he probably will when he watches it. I can't remember me and Jake Fraser-McGurk doing a power hitting session. And I've coached him since he was 11. He will tell you, if you said to him, what does Youngie work with you most on? He'll go, he makes me defend, he makes me make good decisions. Because if you can trust in your defence, and again, this was life superseding cricket, if you can trust in your defence in life is really good qualities and what you stand for as a person and knowing right from wrong and your moral compass. So that's your foundation. Your cricket foundation is your defence, your movement, your decision-making. So if they're strong and your basics, and we talked about that a lot at Richmond, do your basics better for longer? That's why White and Christian were such good players. They could do the basics better for longer. Yeah, they could do the amazing stuff. I think there's a balance. I think Bazball's got it slightly wrong, but I think there's a balance. I mean, the Australian cricket team was scoring at 4 and over through their halcyon days. So it wasn't new. That's why I guess most Australians were a bit miffed when the English guys got all carried away with, Bazball, and we can do all these amazing things. We were kind of like, yeah, okay. But then you saw it in the Perth Test match of the Ashes. When it comes off, it's pretty good. But I would argue that their bowling put them in front in that Test match. And their batting, I think it's widely agreed, Michael Vaughan and a couple other really good experts who know more than me were quite critical of when is it time for Bazball and when is it time just to say, for an hour here, we can close that game down.
Really good insights, amazing as well. Like the analogies, I enjoyed hearing from you, like the traffic light analogy, and you're kind of connecting aspects of cricket to life. And I think it doesn't get done as much as readily. Like people just see it as a game that you, as you mentioned actually very briefly, and we actually talked about it at length prior to this podcast about when you went to Pakistan and the technical coaching that you felt that was the dominating way of teaching cricket. It really exists, but really it's about life philosophies. It's about knowing the person. It's about the character. Like, even in life, like sometimes you need to be patient and take your time. Sometimes you need to take initiative. Sometimes you need to be social and be with people and show that, be that supporting soul or that kind soul. And sometimes you need to, retreat and do studying or do reading if you want to learn about something, right? So it just kind of is about, and it ties into with cricket, like making the right decision to the right ball, knowing the situation. People talk about, the team situation, what the team needs versus what you can do at the moment or how you're feeling. Like all these things, there's a lot happening as a batsman when they're in the middle, right? And the pressure that they have to deal with. And even for yourself, you mentioned Jake Fraser-McGurk, like, I don't think people realize about how much pressure, like it is easier to leave a ball. Like I don't think it's easier to try to smack one through, lofted cover drive for 6, you know what I mean? Like leaving a ball, you just don't play at it, right? It's not think that like, I don't know, like difficult in that sense, right? I mean, it can be depending on the situation, but in a general sense, like it's the easier option when you consider the pressure that when it comes to the high risk shot, high reward, playing for your contract, playing for your livelihood essentially, because you know that you got limited time to play cricket, because then for the rest of your life, what you need to provide for your family, right? So there's a lot of pressure on a young cricketer in that sense, right? So like, I don't think people realize that. So obviously it's a balance. It's about knowing your own game versus the situation. It's about picking the right moments, picking the right balls, etc. So I really enjoy like that kind of parallels with, you know, life. And where did you feel like you attained this sort of understanding? Did you just kind of very observant, you know, took inspiration from people around you and implement in your coaching philosophies? Because I'm curious to know you as a person, or the character behind, you know, the coach yourself, because you're talking about it with other players, like knowing the person behind the player, but I want to know the person behind you as well.
Yeah. Well, you're actually quite astute picking that up, because most coaches would probably sit here and I'm a big fan of Nick Saban through the US, and a lot of the college coaches, and they use storytelling a lot, and I did the same. Where did I pick this stuff up from? It was basically me fucking it up and getting it wrong as a kid. And there's no secret of it, and I was really honest with all the guys at Richmond and all the parents, and everyone knew. I was quite happy to talk to them about I was flawed, and I had a period of my life when I wasn't the best version of me. And when you're not the best version of yourself and you come to the realisation, and mine was, you know, there was some societal factors in it, there was some environmental factors. My parents divorced, my dad died when I was 19, and I just didn't have the faculties to basically accept and understand and navigate that. And you know, I didn't have anyone around me, but I chose not to let anyone in as well. So yeah, when you're not the best version of yourself, and I made mistakes with drugs and alcohol, and I told all these kids that. Yeah, I was actually really open and honest with them, and spoke to them and said, like, yeah, there is a different way. And that also helped me teach them about embracing mistakes. So I mentioned before, I had a car accident at 19 years of age. I was drink driving. You know, very, very fortunate that I got a second chance, and so did one of my mates was in the car. And that was a month after, about 6 weeks after my dad had died. So I just didn't know how to handle it. And the pressure got to me, and I had a lot of pain, and you know, so yeah, where did I learn this stuff? Most of it was from my own journey. And then I was really, I've always been quite an open-minded sort of person. You know, would read not your stock standard sort of motivational books. You know, I did read The Art of War and stuff like that. Took great stuff out of that. But I also just, I think that I learned that to be the best version of yourself, you need the strength in numbers, and you need good people around you, and you need to actually be able to draw that strength from others. And so, yeah, then I decided that, if I was going to try and help people be the best version of themselves, I had to be really honest about the period of time when I wasn't the best version of myself. And then, so yeah, when you're really honest with a bunch of, you know, it was very much like parenting too. I talked a lot. I have two kids of my own, and I talk a lot about these Richmond players. They became my surrogate kids, and you know, Jake is, you know, my two kids will tell you he's the favourite son. I call him my cricket son, but I also taught him that leadership and being the best version of yourself comes at a price. And that price is different for everyone. For me, it was the sacrifice of time away from my own kids. I missed nothing. I glandular fever one pre-season, and against doctor's orders, I drove out to Central, and the club made me sit in my car. They wouldn't let me coach, but I sat in my car and was falling asleep. But to watch the guys play, you birthdays. I miss family birthdays. It probably, if I'm really honest now, it probably cost me my first marriage. Just my commitment, not to Richmond. Like, Richmond wasn't the cause. It was absolutely on me. But I think I also taught him that, and began to realise what you asked me about. How did I identify this, and how did I, encourage them to be the best versions of themselves? Was everything I was telling them was pretty much I had to convince myself of when I was sort of 25, 26 years of age, and I wanted to turn my life around. I said I didn't need it. I didn't have anyone, but I probably didn't open myself up to it. So it was never forced on them either. I always respected their rights as individuals to make their own decisions, and mistakes were okay. But I had some amazing conversations over my journey with young males. We had a female program, but that was sort of at the end of my time, where I had kids told me about. I had kids tell me about their parents passing away. I was the first person they told. I had kids tell me that their parents were divorcing or going through issues, and we had discussions about alcohol and drugs and sexuality and gambling addiction and all these things that, for me, that was just such a privilege. That wasn't what you sign up for a cricket coach. Most people out there think, you just throw balls, right? You throw balls, you teach people about technique. For me, it was, if we created the best learning environment, well, I had to be the best role model for that. And the only way to do that was to actually acknowledge that, hey, I got it wrong. And you don't have to. Yeah, but if you do, I'm going to pick you up and I'm going to hug you just as much when you make 100. Because that's life. That's the journey. And then that was, I said before, it wasn't about my cricket, and it wasn't. Yeah, it was about them being the best version of themselves.
I mean, that was incredible. I mean, I appreciate you being so vulnerable and being honest about you. And I think that's the essence. Like, I think the human experience is about authenticity and being real. And sometimes, and just tying it to cricket, where if we're at the nets and the coach is just coaching and showing technique, like, there's a level of facade, a level of being, or trying to be a certain person, or pretending, that goes into that. And that really makes me sad, because it's like, as you said, and what you've discussed and everything you've shared, and I'm thankful for you doing that, being so open with everything, is that it's about the human experience, it's about sense of belonging. And you're saying that all these players are being so vulnerable with you as well, and sharing all these things, like, that in of itself, that human experience is obviously going to play into someone's cricket, right? So, like, if someone had some tragedy in their life, obviously the way they approach cricket it will be influenced, right? Like, there will be a direct connection. And if as a coach you don't know that, or you just think it as a technical thing, like, what are you doing? Like, you're you're in a different dimension to this kid. Whereas if you assess everything about this young cricketer, this gun cricketer, you'll know that, okay, subconsciously, if he's gone through things like this in his personal life, then subconsciously something happens out in the middle, it will mirror in a certain way, and then he'll react a certain way. So, like, having that kind of support network around him, like, you're clearly showing, or everything you've discussed today is like, you're being that support for that player, for them to be vulnerable. You're more likely to get the best out of that player, right? And on top of that as well, you observing so many kids, you'll know, like, okay, it could be like someone goes through a tragedy, and then there's two ways it can go. Someone can be even more nervous out there, because it's like all or nothing. They feel like they've got so much going on in their life, and they have to score or whatever it is, right? Versus someone that might take that tragedy and be like, it fuels that fire that might actually help them to do well. So people are so different, right? Like, people react differently, and it's about understanding that cycle. And this is literally the basis of why I started this podcast, is to have these kind of raw, authentic conversations as well. So I really appreciate your honesty and everything that you said. I don't know if you had any thoughts around what I just said, but
no, 100%. It's a really interesting point you raise, and I think I said to you, I'm not a huge fan of social media, and most people out there know that. Currently, I was happy to do your podcast because I'd seen a lot of your stuff, but even just the name of your podcast, the Cerebral Cricketer, So that is one part of what I say player, person before the player. There's cerebral, there's emotional, and there's lots of mental performance stuff getting marched out now. I believe in mental performance, trust me, but I don't believe in breathing exercises and when you're under pressure, do this. So
Yeah,
I think,
I'm in the same boat.
yeah,
I think it's a good tool. It
yeah,
can be,
100%.
but
Everything's
it's
a good tool, and what may work for one doesn't work for another.
Yeah.
But I do believe in when you're under pressure or you're going really well, know the best version of you and know yourself. Know what your triggers are, know what... and then for me as a coach, to do that, and you say, you had to understand the individual. So you're right. There were some individuals at a pressure situation, they would go green light. Yeah, they would attack it. Yeah, which is Fraser-McGurk, Sleeman, a couple of other guys I had. Then there were other guys that when they were faced with a pressure situation, who were really, really good players, they might retreat and they would go back and play a different way. Now, neither of them was right or wrong, but to really understand how you best had to coach them in those situations and the mental performance side of the game, you had to notice the little details. So I knew, it sounds funny going back through it. I knew what time my guys got to training. I knew what direction they came from. I knew how they drove into the car park. Yeah, I knew, when their girlfriends were at cricket for 3 weeks and then I wouldn't see their girlfriend for a couple of weeks. I knew all this stuff because it was important to me, because it helped me understand them better. So then it was easy for them to come and open up to me when they felt vulnerable, because the performance was just a performance, and it wasn't what they stood for. It wasn't indicative of their self-worth or.
Imagine like a player got like broken up hypothetically, and then he has a game like literally the next hour, and the coach is telling me, no, you got out because your technique is wrong. Like it's the biggest misdiagnosis in history.
Absolutely. Or or they've had a really poor night's sleep. Well, why? Most of us would go, oh, they must have gone out, or they must have been on PlayStation.
But people have ADHD and
correct,
struggle.
100%. I'm neurodivergent. I'm high functioning autism. So I started to understand those sorts of behaviours too. I coach so many kids that are on the spectrum that they were unaware of it, but I knew, and I had to actually then adjust my approach.
I'm so glad you're talking about this, because this is all I'm passionate about as well. So
I think that it's starting to become much more accepted. But it's part of our world now, right? And both my kids are on the spectrum. My son was diagnosed at 5 years of age. He's now 19. So my diagnosis came out of him being diagnosed. Now, my daughter, who hasn't got as high as spectrum behaviours, but they're totally different behaviours. So if you can get a difference in a male and female with the same genetics, imagine when you've got different cultures and different, areas of Melbourne they live in. I knew all that. Yeah. And if I didn't know, I asked. And I said to him, hey, look, if I'm intruding, feel free to tell me, no, young, you need to take a step back. But notice your girlfriend hasn't been here for a couple of weeks. Everything okay? Most of them would sort of say, yeah, no, we're all okay. But some of them would go, no, it's not. We're navigating something. Okay, all right. I can only share. I can't tell you what to do. I can only share with you my experience. Now, the fact that I'd been so open and they knew I was navigating a divorce for about 3 years of Richmond, I didn't go to the kids and go, oh, I'm getting a divorce. Yeah, I understood I had to leave things personally and go and be a coach. So what they learned was, you have to compartmentalise. But in terms of what actually drives us and mental performance, and as we were talking about, yes, some techniques work for some people, some don't. Some you can't march out, a mental performance framework or a system or a program. And it's kind of what my criticism of modern cricket coaching is at the moment. Like we talked about it, that old school was really technical. The modern approach is kind of like, oh, everything's got to be linked to, what's going on in your life. Now, for some people, they'll happily embrace that. For some people, they don't want to address that. Cricket's their escape. Cricket's what they can apply themselves. That that is where they know who they are. Yeah, and that was the other thing. So on field, knowing who you are versus off field, knowing who you are was quite often two really different things. Sometimes it was attached, but sometimes it was really different. So if you're having trouble at school or at home or your relationship, all these things that the kids have to navigate, but you knew, hey, on a cricket field, I'm this guy. Well, you don't want to assess that. You don't want to address all that stuff when you're at Richmond Cricket Club. You want to just go out and play, right? But I also had to understand when there were societal factors or environmental factors or emotional factors that may have been affecting performance. And then you started to learn, well, who are the guys that can compartmentalise, can put things aside and perform or go to war, compete, regardless of what's happening in other areas of their life. And who are the kids who at 16, 17 years of age can't do that? Well, we shouldn't expect them to be able to do that. Most of us as grown adults can't do it. So that was the holistic approach. And that was probably what I was most proud of. I mean, you talk about cricket highlights and, most people go, oh, I was there the day, Fraser-McGurk got 70 off 15 balls at, Danny Nong in a T20. That was great. Don't get me wrong. Like, seeing that kid do really well was great. Seeing Mitch Perry take 10 wickets on debut, like, they're amazing experiences. But I had Mitchell out to a YoungGun Academy a couple of weeks ago, and my favourite Mitch Perry moment was in his first year of state cricket. He was late to a session, right? And he got caught up on the Monash. He'd left an hour and a half to get from Berwick to the Junction Oval. So he did everything right. And then he was late. And so he's a kid who's done everything right through his whole cricket career. He gets the chance of a lifetime, and one of the first sessions of Victoria, he's late. Now, he rang me and said, Coach, I'm late. I said, mate, cop it, just explain. Now, his response to that is, and I told these kids at YoungGun, Mitchell now gets 2.5 hours before any time he's got to be somewhere. Yeah? Sometimes he'll sleep in his car. Sometimes if he's got to be here, he'll go over and get a coffee. But that's the response. Yeah? So the response was quite often where we put our focus, not the action or not the incident. Yeah, the incident is, as the name suggests, incidental, right? So it was about the response to that and knowing what player, according to their, emotional makeup or cerebral makeup or holistic makeup. I had guys who were high emotional. Yeah, no problem. I had guys who were really analytical. I had guys that I could absolutely say, look, we weren't good enough today. Our standards weren't adhered to. No problem. I could cop that. Then there was others that if I did that in front of the whole group, I'd lose them. So you just had to know who you were coaching.
I mean, that was amazing. Like, for me, I mean, I can only speak for myself. Like, because I enjoyed cricket. I played cricket my whole life. I was a youngster. Like, I had talent, but then because it's hard, like sometimes you need the support system around you to, play higher grades or whatever. So I've always been very critical of myself, and it wasn't only until so I took batting maybe seriously when I was like maybe 20, out of during university, started playing for a club in Sydney, Coogee Bay Rebels Cricket Club. And I was very, playing as a batsman, I was always very defensive. Like, I was always a bit nervous, but I was very defensive, a bit pessimistic, I would say. And I realized that style of playing, and people see me as someone that blocks a lot and hangs around, is actually an extension of my personality when it comes to being safe outside of cricket, taking things, a lot of things happen, going to a bit of a shell, that kind of stuff. So I only was understanding this, I would say, in the last 5 to 6 years. And so now I'm the complete different batsman. a lot more aggressive and stuff. And people are like shocked, like they know me as that guy of like, you know, jokingly call me like Pujara or whatever when I was like at that age versus now. And then I tell them like I learnt myself, like I learnt my triggers. I learnt why I was, at the time I didn't have that understanding of myself. But once I started to realize, okay, it's not just about cricket, it's about everything in my life. Like how do I respond to people? How do I take things? Am I very sensitive? Am I this or am I that? And it kind of plays out in your cricket, and people don't really, like, subconsciously it has to, because you're doing one action outside of cricket, and you're doing one action. It's not like two separate domains. It's literally connected. It's interconnected, right? And so for me, I started seeing that, and I'm like, okay, I have things that I put in place for my cricket. If I know that, okay, I'm feeling okay, even though the situation is tough, that I can still have a clear mind and make the best decision and stuff like that. Like, and that's where I become the best version of myself. Obviously, it's not. I'm old now, like 29, but you know, I love playing cricket, and that's partly why I started this podcast as well, because it's like when I noticed that transformation in myself and understanding myself, I'm like, I want to have these kind of conversations, and like I really like valued this conversation. I thought it was like everything that you shared is exactly like my ethos, that I've been trying to have these kind of conversations, because it's not prevalent. I don't think it really occurs, unfortunately, right? Like, and it should be the norm, and I'm hoping the tide changes. But you also said yourself, like, you know, people have seen that kind of old school mentality. It still exists in a lot of ways, right? But the way that you've articulated your experiences, your coaching methodologies, the way that you you know, support the players that looked up to you as like another dad, all this kind of stuff, like that's how it should be. And I think that should be the gold standard. But unfortunately, it's not being done in the way that we would like, because a lot of players don't have that. And you don't get the best out of them, right?
I hear what you're saying, and I agree to a certain extent. The only thing I'd have you think about is I don't think there's a gold standard.
Right. Yeah.
I don't think there's one way for any way.
I'm just saying, I'm not saying like exactly the way you're doing it. It's more so like that methodology where you're saying that we should be mindful of the person and the human being, and being incorporated into the philosophy. Yeah. I thought that part itself is
look, and that would, you know, you go to coaching courses, and you speak to people around, and they'll always say, "Oh, what's your coaching philosophy?" You know, you go for a job, and it's always been a really hard question for me to answer, because I guess it's mine's probably not standard, and. You know, we've now been talking for I don't know how long. It's you know, it's been 45 minutes or maybe an hour. It's but we haven't talked technique once. We haven't talked about, you know, how did you teach them to play the game? And fundamentally, I'm of the same belief as you. If you know, but it gets much out all the time, right? Know the person, not the player. Oh, it's coach the person, but I think some people who embrace that methodology do it from, I saw this thing on Facebook, or I saw this thing on Instagram. I know the young guys don't use Facebook anymore, so I'll show my age there and my lack of social media, but it was someone else's theory. And that's all well and good, and you know, there's a popular saying around that success leaves clues and all that sort of stuff, and I'm like, oh, yeah, but then we end up, you know, trying to teach particularly our young players to be someone else, right? Oh, you should play like this player. You know, it's okay if you trigger like Steve Smith. You know, everyone now, every time I see a post on Instagram, it's Suryavanshi. The reason why Suryavanshi swings the bat is because of this, right? The reason why Suryavanshi swings the bat like that is probably because he's got an ultimate belief from the people around him when he walks out that say, mate, if that first ball's back of a length and you want to whack it over cover, well, we've got total belief in, you know, it's the freedom to fail. And we always talk about the narrative of, I had the fear of failure. I very rarely hear it put, you had the freedom to fail. And when you've got the freedom to fail, that's when I think the responses come in, and then you see the personal side of it. But the fear of failure, like everyone has a fear of failure, right? It's not this magical thing that, you know, I've heard Steve Waugh talk about. was, afraid every time he went out to bat in a test match. He was afraid of letting people down. He was afraid he wouldn't perform to his own expectations and his own standards. It's a fascinating thing. But is it the gold standard? No, it's not. Can you have success doing it other ways? 100% you can, because there is no one size fits all. There's no cookie cutter. Life is not a cookie cutter, and we should all embrace that we're different. Yes, we can have the same philosophies, share the same sort of, mantras on how things go about, but our individuality is what makes it great. And that's why, I talk to a lot of people about, a lot of Australians sort of, cricket was very much, we talked about the traditions before, it was very male, pale and stale. Now, the one thing I don't think people get about T20 cricket and franchise cricket is you get this meeting of, all these best players in the world playing with each other. The Renegades, I spent a bit of time around the Renegades a couple of years ago, a bit of time around the Stars last year, and, you've got guys like Tim Seifert and Tom Curran and Joey Clark. Like these guys are bringing, they've played franchise cricket all around the world. So they're sharing stuff. Tim Seifert's a great one. I love Tim Seifert. He's great. Great guy. I love talking about the game with him. But his backswing, like we were talking about before, is moulded from Faf du Plessis. You can see the similarities. So he hasn't gone out and just done, I'm going to do what he did. He spoke to him about it. That's the key. He spoke to him and said, okay, why? The real key is speak to people, ask questions, but the real question is why? Cricket coaching, a lot of stuff has become about the how. How do I do that? How do I do this drill? How do I fix this mistake? Don't worry about the how. Ask the why. Because when you ask the why, then you're forced to look a little bit more internally.
Introspection.
There you go. Yeah.
100%. And I know you've been so generous with your time. This could go on for like hours, honestly. Maybe we can do another one. We could touch more on other aspects. But as a last question, I know we didn't talk about CPL as much, but I'd love to just kind of get an idea what you're doing at CPL. And you've worked with the likes of Babar Azam and Sudarshan as well. So I'd like to get an idea of what's happening there.
So CPL, again, that's another topic in itself. CPL, Cricket Performance Lab, was born out of like everything in cricket. It's been... that I've created or thought about or produced, or everything has always been about the one same thing: making people better, giving people the opportunity to be better. So I'd owned an equipment brand. I'd watched MS Dhoni at the IPL swap bats. Dan Christian was playing with him, who I was coaching at the time. And then in a perfect storm, I started YoungGun, and a really good mate of mine, Chris, who was one of the founders of CPL, he had a cricket shop. So we had this interest in cricket bats. And we'd started exploring, and we found some technology in America that was a baseball technology, which is BPI, which drives... So Cricket Performance Lab is built on the back of BPI, which was an algorithm in a scale which measured a whole heap of variables about cricket bats. So we became the first people in the world that could give an objective measurement for the feel of a cricket bat, which is pretty significant. The fact that it's a fat bloke and a skinny old-looking bloke from Moorabbin that created a world first in cricket. It's pretty. It's probably only just sort of sunk in over the last few years. So we were exploring all this, and we had no time. We were both doing 30. We're both level 3 coaches, doing 30 to 35 coaching sessions a week. I was coaching Richmond, and I think I made the statement like, this is great, but where are we going to find the time to actually explore this to the level we need? And a week later, and it was absolutely a week later, COVID hit. And my business got shut down. So I have 7 businesses that 3 or 4 are client-facing. All those got shut down. Chris could still sell some cricket bats online, which was great. So we went into a deep dive. We found a ex-professional golfer who was doing it for baseball. So BPI was a thing in baseball. And that's where it started from. So my own money sunk it into creating the Cricket Performance Lab because I believed that over, like I said before, over, I don't know how many balls of cricket I've watched, probably be 10 million. You could just tell when people had the wrong bat. It affected their swing. It affected their movement. It affected their decision making. And so, we started the Cricket Performance Lab, and it was just a case of it frustrates me a little bit that it doesn't frustrate me that some people go, it's hocus pocus. That's fine. Right. What frustrates me is if something could make you 1% better, right? And there's no guarantees, but if something had the potential to make you 1% better, why would you not? We've just spent an hour talking about an environment and these guys wanting to be in the 1% of players that get to live their dreams and be professional cricketers. So a lot of the pros that come in, I love them. I love them dearly, including my old mate Rooster. They're golf fanatics, right? So golf fitting exists, same as cricket bat fitting exists. Golf fitting's been around for about 25 years. So if you want to go and buy a pair of golf clubs or set of golf clubs, I don't even know what you call it, you go in and you hit golf balls and they fit you and they say, these clubs are going to perform best for you. That's all we do with cricket bats. Now, most of the pros that come in, who I said are really avid golfers, I say to them, have you had a golf fitting? And they go, yeah, I've had 2 or 3. Right? So they've had golf fittings for their hobby. This thing, which is our only offensive piece of equipment. Do you understand what I'm saying? Yeah? Helmets, pads, everything else is defensive. So we're talking about how the game gets played. We're talking about bads ball. We're talking about all this stuff. So if someone said, hey, we think we can give you a bat that helps you perform 1% better, why would you not take that opportunity?
Yeah, no, exactly.
That's. But we've had about 450 fittings. We've taken them. We've had people all around the world. So look, I'm really happy about it. And did I set out to change the game? No, not necessarily. But even when I built YoungGun, if you're a young cricketer out there and you're fortunate enough to go to a cricket centre with white nets and turf-coloured wickets and live video replay, well, you're welcome, because I was the first person to do all those things. And that was just a standard thing. So when I was running Premier Cricket pre-seasons in Melbourne in indoor centres like Hawthorn Indoor and Xavier College and stuff, facilities were shit. When I decided that I was going to build YoungGun, it was at a standard that was designed to make people better, same as Cricket Performance Lab is. And since then, I'm obviously now in Cricket Victoria. We're at the Junction Oval at the moment and working more with the high-performance guys and girls, and we're starting to link that technical aspect to strength and conditioning and the swing dynamics. So there's more that sits behind CPL than just finding the right bat. We've got a lot of, the world-first tech is great, but we have a lot of world-first knowledge and world-first data on how those cricket bats are being swung. So, but ultimately, it's about making people better. Everything I do is about making people better.
And what sort of work did Babar Azam and Sudarshan do when they visited CPL?
Yeah. So Babar came in. I first met Babar in Lahore, as Azhar Ali's academy. I was in Pakistan and in Lahore, and I got told that we were going to an academy because someone wanted to see me, and it was Babar. So we'd arranged that he came over, and at the time he was with Grey Nichols UK, and they were lovely bats, but they were really high BPI, which means they're harder physically to move. We fitted him to a BPI 75, which in terms of the pros is quite low. There's no right or wrong BPI. There's no good or bad. He came in and we talked bats for about 2 hours. He hit a whole heap of balls, and he then played, I reckon their next game must have been a one-dayer at the MCG, and he batted with a 75 BPI. Sai came through a couple of mutual friends of mine. Wonderful guy. Like, so in tune with his game. Same bat fitting. Obviously, he was with SG at the time. Because the other thing that CPL, probably the real code that we've cracked is we can now modify bats to BPI. So Si came in with 5 or 6 bats, did the fitting, we fitted him to BPI, and then we modified all those other bats so they swung the same, which, blew his mind. And he still kind of reaches out through his manager to me on occasions. We haven't, he's just swapped, he swapped bat sponsors. I'm not sure who's making his bats, whether it's still SG or, but yeah, we'll try and hook up in the future. But mostly it was about making guys better. Some of the bat manufacturers, like the technology. Some don't. That's okay. They're missing out. Without, I have wonderful respect for guys who make bats. I think it's a great craft and they're really good at what they do. But I would argue that, in effect, they're tradesmen. No offence to tradesmen in the slightest. Some of my best mates are tradies. But they're handing professional players bats saying this is the bat you should use. My gut says that a player or a coach who's watched 30 million cricket balls hit probably has a better idea of performance of a cricket bat than the guy who's making it. A lot will disagree with that statement. I mean, they're out there trying to earn a living from making bats and stuff. But I've got a young guy who I coached at Camberwell, who's got Badger cricket. He's in the lab a lot. He's trying to get better at what he does. Lockie Dinger from Kookaburras, been really instrumental in getting some Kookaburra players in. He's trying to get better at what he does. So, it's not just the players getting better. It's all sorts of people who can benefit from CPL. But we do grassroots players. It's not, you don't have to be a pro.
I appreciate your time. Thank you so much for sharing all your insights, and definitely probably have to do another interview at some point just to pick your brains a bit more. But do you have any final thoughts before we wrap up the show?
Look, it's the game is such a wonderful game on so many levels. It's so multi-dimensional. What I would say to a young player out there is don't limit yourself by, it's got to be done this way. Or, I'm getting better or I'm trying to get better because I'm liking or following things on Instagram and stuff. With all due respect to you, your podcast is great. But, it's what you take out of it, right? So I don't need... young players out there or old players or anyone that's interested in cricket to watch this podcast and go, oh my God, he's amazing. It's not about me. It's about the players. And it's about the game and it's about us exploring. And I know you sent me some stuff. We were talking about the best players in the game and my favourite players. And I think you said you want to know who the most talented is. Well, that's an easy one. That's hands down Fraser-McGurk. Fraser-McGurk's the most talented player I've ever had anything to do with. Whether he reaches that talent and reaches the best version of himself, well, time will tell, but I wouldn't bet against him. My favourite player at the moment is Glenn Phillips, which, is probably some people are out there probably thinking, Glenn Phillips. If you are going to use Instagram for what it's good for, go and follow Glenn Phillips. Do you follow Glenn Phillips?
I think I do, yeah. Right. I've seen some of his stuff.
Yeah. So Glenn Phillips will try and deadlift or bench press the most weight he can. He has a fielding thing that I used to show all my guys at Richmond and YoungGun cricket. There's this clip where he picks a ball up one-handed, left-handed at 100% running capacity and transfers it to his right hand and throws it in almost like a baseballer without the mitt. Incredible. He's been batting left-handed for close to 6 or 7 years in the nets, batting left-handed. So we see him do it in a New Zealand domestic game. He hits like a cover drive and people are like, oh my God. Well, he's been challenging how this game's played. That's why he's my favourite player. I love anyone that challenges how this game's played and continues to do it. So, and in your own small way, because you've gone away from, what could be considered the standard cricket podcast,
and you've started to actually try and tap into some of those holistic things, fair play to you, because you're trying to make people better as well.
I appreciate that linkage to Glenn Phillips and the podcast, but no, like that's essentially the goal of the show, and I think I hope the listeners benefit from everything we've discussed today. So thank you so much for coming on the show, and I'll wrap it up there. So for listeners, thank you for tuning in. Please support us on our socials. We're on Instagram, we're on Facebook, we're on TikTok as well. We're on YouTube, so you can find us a long content form there. You can also see us on Spotify, Apple, iTunes, and also Amazon podcast. That's it. So for our special guest Shannon Young, we wish you the best. This is Tanzam signing off. Thank you very much.